Welcome to week 9 soccer, and it's this is a scene from the World Cup, I believe, in 1974, when Germany, one of the 4 times Germany's won the World Cup. That's Franz Beckenbauer. This would be West Germany at this point, hoisting the cup, and soccer is this and next week are going to be the most international of the weeks we look at, probably actually this week. We'll be talking about Americans some of the time. We'll also be talking about the world quite a bit because soccer is sort of the world in one sense. It's the only truly global sport. There are cultures that don't really compete soccer, but it is on every major every continent. And has proponents all over the world. Okay, that's the Jules Rimet Trophy. Soccer, as many of these sports that we've been particularly looking at in the last few weeks, soccer evolved from a number of kicked ball games played historically throughout Europe and Asia, some of which go back a very long time. We're talking about thousands of years, depicted in ancient civilizations. But it slowly starts to coalesce in England and in Europe, and then slowly, kind of after that, after 1848, a group of people get together in Cambridge in 1848, and they're unable to completely uniformize it, but they start the conversation at the very least. The first club, which was a British club, was in 1863, sort of a professional club. And slowly but surely, some of the rules that the Cambridge group were struggling with and eventually made determinations about begin to spread outward into first Europe and then South America as well, and Africa. You start to see the development of certain schools of play in the early 20th century. 3 areas, of particular focus. The first was England, the British Isles, specifically England and Ireland, and later Scotland and Wales. That was one, and certainly the earliest. It really began to sort of create their own culture of soccer, and it really became, very popular. Another was in Italy. I think I said there's 3. Actually, I can think of 4. Sort of the Italians kind of created their own system. Started coming up with their own strategies and whatnot. They didn't do quite as well at the turn of the century, but in the 1920s and 30s, they were one of the dominant teams. And then the third European one was in more Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Okay, kind of in that region, started kind of innovating their own approaches to soccer. And, it's slowly but surely, as you start having more international tournaments, starting with the 1924, the World Cup, and other international tournaments, and the Olympics, they start learning from each other, including from a 4th group, which was not from Europe, and that was the South American triumvirate of initially Argentina and Uruguay, and then just a little bit later, Brazil. Okay. Those were the 3 soccer powers of the Southern Hemisphere. So, as they start to kind of play each other in major competitions such as the Olympics or the World Cup, or just in kind of exhibition games, or even in minor tournaments, these various schools that have kind of developed these different sort of strategies for different positions, and defensive strategies, offensive strategies, they start to learn from each other, and you start getting a more kind of uniform game. And because you're competing in places like the Olympics and the World Cup, from a group called FIFA, football, I can't remember, Federation of International Football Association or something like that. I think it started in 1904, sort of just right after the turn of the century, and compete the first World Cup in 1924. The British don't compete, and it would be interesting to see what would happen if they would have. They didn't compete until the 1950 World Cup, but the first 2 World Cups are won by first World Cup's won by Uruguay, and the next two are won by Italy. And Argentina does quite well. Brazil does quite well. Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Those are the sort of the dominant teams before World War II. Certain specialized positions and different strategic schemes that generally favor either offense or defense. I'll just throw out one example of one that doesn't seem to be, that kind of was during this time period, more the, sort of the 20s through the 60s or 70s even, was the sweeper system. You don't tend to see it as much today. I mean, people have variations on it, but instead of having two backs, you had three backs, and you would take one back and just attach them to a striker, one of the two strikers on the other team, and then you had another back with laser focus in on the other striker, and then you had a third back whose job was to just kind of play, go wherever they thought they needed to be, basically. Somebody who could react quickly, who was very intelligent, who could kind of read the field and understand what they were trying to do, and who would just be sort of a third back to try to keep shots on goal from happening. Well, that's great, but then you're giving up, if you're going to have two fullbacks all the way back, if you're going to have a third, that's taking away someone from an offensive player, probably from one of the midfielders. Okay. So, you can focus, that's a more defensive strategy, but it gives up offense, and that type of thing. Okay. So, you tend to have your strikers, they're your upfront players, they're your fast players, they have good goal sense. There was this guy named Gerd Müller. People, kind of thought he was lucky. He wasn't lucky. He knew where to be when. He just kind of had that sense. I remember seeing the great Brazilian striker, Ronaldo, very overweight in his last World Cup. I mean, the British fans were not nice to him, and some of the songs that they chant at him. He still scored goals. I mean, it's like, it didn't matter that he was fat and slow. He just kind of, had a sense of where the ball was going, and out of the corner of his eye, he'd see somebody coming in here. He just kind of moved to where he needed to be, and the ball would find him miraculously. It wasn't miraculous. And the strikers kind of had that sense, and they go for the kill. Then you have the midfielders, who's kind of a little bit of defense, a little bit of offense, a lot of skilled players, great passers, pinpoint passers, very intelligent, savvy players. They can score. They can play defense. Then you have your fullbacks, your two defense people who, are okay to go beyond midfield, but I mean, their job is to stay behind and to kind of pass the ball in to the midfielders and the strikers. And then you have your goalie, whose job it is to keep people out of the. Early soccer had a lot of scoring. Well, it's because the average goalie was, like 5'9", which was like tall for the time. Well, the average goalies now are much taller than that. They're much more athletic too. So, people have talked about maybe we should increase the average human has grown larger. Maybe we should increase the size of the goal, but that hasn't been done yet. Speed, soccer is a lot faster than you realize. These guys run in 90 minutes. They run like 10 miles sometimes, just back and forth. Stamina for 90 minutes. You see them sucking oranges during halftime in old films. Now they probably just drink Gatorade, but you got to replenish. Great eye-foot coordination and teamwork. Pinpoint passing is very, very important. Okay. Something that was a real problem in the 30s and the 50s and even into the 60s is that there was a lot of violence on the somebody goes for the ball and they kick someone in the shins, and so then they get an elbow in the eye going back down the field, and this was a real problem. And in fact, I think it's called the Battle of Santiago, and then there's the Battle of Bern. You can look those two up. One was like Brazil, or it was Chile versus Italy. That was the Battle of Santiago. And it was because the Italian team was going to be playing the Chilean team, and the Italians were sort of denigrating the Chilean team in the press. talking about how they were inferior. And, there was a real sort of Europe, a colonial, even though Chile was a Spanish colony, they still had anger and frustration towards Europe. And it didn't help that the Italians were basically questioning their masculinity. And so I think that was the 1954 World Cup, maybe. I can't remember exactly when it was. No, because that was the Battle of Bern. But, they had this, people were getting punched and kicked, and one guy broke his leg, and, it was just kind of horrible. And then the Battle of Bern was between, I believe, Hungary and Brazil. And it was so violent on the field that they had a pitched battle in the dressing room afterwards. This is Bern, Switzerland. I mean, this is Switzerland. This is sort of like the site of neutrality and, peacefulness and this, that, and the other. So, they instituted the yellow card, red card system in 1970. And it really did work, and it still works to this day. Sometimes somebody gets a yellow and they don't quite deserve it. And then they get a second one they deserve and they're gone. If you get 2 yellow cards, you're asked to leave. If you get a red card, you're asked to leave. This was too late for the 1969 soccer war that you read about. One of many myths. It's not like these two countries were peaceful and then they had the soccer match and then they went to war with each other. They were essentially already on war footing, and this just sort of helped push it over the edge. It was about economic disparity between the two countries. It was about immigration from one to another. And the anger and frustration that they felt with each other. And then they had this soccer match, and yelling and throwing of punches in the stands led to a brief war that lasted a couple of weeks, but in which, hundreds and hundreds of people were killed. Another sort of mythology is the death match, which, I think the source that you saw, that you read, or maybe it was a YouTube clip, suggests that might be a little overstated. But soccer has been at the center of a lot of these political disputes because it is the only truly global game. I mean, I'm always fascinated when I see like, for instance, a Spain-Mexico match or a England-Ghana match, or a French-Algerian match, when it's the European colonial power who dominated and controlled and pillaged a country, and then that country gets its freedom, and then 25 years later they meet in one of the World Cups. It's always interesting to see. Germany, Poland, or Japan, Korea, Japan, China, World War II competitors, U.S., Mexico, borders. So, people that share borders, the soccer wars, El Salvador and Honduras, the fact that U.S. and Mexico don't like each other and have had a lot of fights. Right after 9/11, there was the youth match, the under-20 match between the United States and the Mexican crowd was chanting Osama, Osama, Osama bin Laden, after the 2001. So border clashes. And then, as I mentioned, the colonial, the colonial matches that we see from time to time. And then I also mentioned that the, sort of like World War II, the sort of the World War II foes that now meet on the pitch. Sometimes it can be very positive. There have been some of these that go off without a hitch, and everyone hugs each other, and you think, wow, in fact, Japan and Korea co-hosted. I believe it was the 2002 World Cup. They're still kind of not necessarily friendly because of the Japanese occupation of Korea from 1910 to 1945. But, that was a step in the right direction. I remember one of the years, it may have even been 2004 or 2002, when the U.S. and Iran met. And, they go out to give each other a gift before the match. The captains exchange a gift in World Cup games. And then afterwards, you exchange jerseys. And there were so many gifts that they were heaping on each other, because I think they realized that, hey, the world's watching. They know that the U.S. and the Iran are starting to become enemies. So we don't have to be enemies. We're gonna not just give one gift to the American. I remember they just were like heaping stuff on each other. They're like trying to carry all this loot back to the sidelines and not drop any of it on the field. And there was no violence in that match. So sometimes it goes poorly. This sort of what we call soccer diplomacy. Sometimes it goes poorly. Other times it goes really, really well. And sports can be a sort of an agent of, real help and ability to move beyond something. That, hey, look, our politicians are maybe at each other's throat and hate each other, but we're here for the sport. We're here for the sport, and we're going to follow the best, the sort of the best aspects of decorum, and make sure that we don't, trip you unnecessarily and, kick you in the shins and stuff like that. I got to witness one of these firsthand in the 1994 World Cup was being held in the United States. But I wasn't in the United States. I spent the year living in England, and I was traveling around Europe with my parents in the summer afterwards. They came over to visit, and we basically traveled around for a while, and we found ourselves in Portugal for the final match. We didn't realize this until we just started seeing people walking towards this kind of like outdoor place where you could buy ice cream and a few other things. So we just decided to go along and see what was happening, and it turns out it was all the Portuguese people from this camping area were heading there to watch the World Cup. Okay, and it was the finals between Brazil and Italy. And, I didn't know this at the time. I was just a college student. I hadn't done a lot of research into sports and whatnot. I hadn't realized that Portugal and Brazil have a very uneasy relationship when it comes to their soccer. Okay, because Portugal was the colonial power that colonized Brazil. They were pretty brutal. Okay, they brought in, they were pretty brutal on the indigenous population. They brought in slaves from Africa to work on plantations and whatnot. So there's still a lot of anger and frustration from the Brazilians towards the Portuguese, and they've met in the World Cup a number of times. And I think Brazil's only beaten Portugal once, even though Brazil's way the better team historically. Portugal always seems to come out on top, and that includes the 1966 World Cup when they just savaged Pele. Would just knock him down. He couldn't take a few steps without getting kicked in the shins, and that's why. And one reason why they instituted the yellow card, red card, was because he was just getting mugged on the field. So the Brazilians and the Portuguese have had this kind of animosity. But what was interesting, thinking back on it, I learned about this animosity later, is the Portuguese in that match in 1994 at that kind of like outdoor bar that sold ice cream was that they were really rooting for the Portuguese and were really happy. For the Brazilians, and then they were really happy that they won. So they were rooting for a former colony over a fellow European country. So that was kind of interesting. It's a lot of politics with soccer. It's the most popular sport on earth, particularly in Europe, Africa, and Latin America. It's not the most popular in China, India, the US, and Indonesia, however, where half the world's population resides in these four countries, essentially, maybe like 45%. However, it's not the most popular or even the second or third in India or China, but it is a sport that is popularly contested. And same thing in the United States. I think it's probably more popular than hockey. Okay, we talk about hockey being the fourth, but that's more of a historical distinction. Soccer is perhaps, and same thing with Indonesia, it's somewhat popular there. Now, the interesting thing about it being the fourth in the US, whenever I teach this class, we go around and we say, who do you support in the World Cup? And one reason I do this is because I'm always curious what my what the response will, what the response, how the response is going to differ based on background. A lot of Chicano and Chicana students say Mexico, or they say Mexico and the United States. And so then I say, well, what happens if it's Mexico versus the United States? And the answer is often Mexico. Okay. I have a friend that's American citizen. His mother is Irish, and he votes for the Irish team or the British team over the Americans. Why? Because his American dad didn't really care all that much about soccer when he was growing up, and the mother was like rabid soccer fan. So he became I have another friend. It's almost the exact same situation, except for it's a Romanian dad, and who came over at some point and married a U.S. citizen, and he's a Romanian, the Romanian, the Romanian dad won out because, again, of the fervor. So there's a lot of American citizens who support Mexico, who support England, who support, name the team, Brazil, because, a lot of there's a lot of sort of international marriages in the United States. And it results in kind of these split soccer allegiances, okay? Where hey, I support both teams, but then when push comes to shove, well, let's say they meet, it looks like they might be able to meet in the quarterfinals. Who are you gonna support? And sometimes the answer is the United States. Sometimes the answer is the other country. So soccer kind of exposes the fact that we are a very international, at least in the United States, we're a very internationally invested populace. Okay. Many of us have some connection to a different part of the world. Okay. Whether it be Latin America, Asia, Europe, or wherever. Okay. A lot of people do. And yeah, okay, so maybe it's that all my friends come from California, so it's a little bit different than it would be if we were in Kansas. But soccer, you can't start talking to somebody about soccer for too long before you start getting into these aspects of how imbricated the United States is on the global international scene. And so it's fascinating. That's one reason I think soccer's, I think baseball is the most interesting sport historically. I think soccer is the most interesting sport politically. And notice neither of these are the two sports I watch the most and enjoy the most, which is basketball and football. Basketball and football have interesting politics, particularly with the Colin Kaepernick thing. But I just think that soccer is probably the most interesting political sport politically. So, the FIFA World Cup, it wasn't, it was 30 to 30, 34, 38. Those were the first three, not in the 1920s, like I mentioned, and 1950s to the present. 5 teams are responsible for 17 of the 20 winners. It should now probably be 21. I think I haven't updated this slide since France. But that just goes to show you that Uruguay, now France, we can put France on there. So it'd be, let's see,